You may be familiar with the four pillars of data analytics or the four types of data analytics. Stop me if you've heard this before. We have descriptive analytics, we have diagnostic analytics, we have predictive analytics, and then we have prescriptive analytics. They're usually represented as kind of this growing chain, this ladder with a implication that really the only thing that is really valuable is that prescriptive analytics. That's what we should be shooting for. That's what we need. I actually don't think that framing is all that useful. It is alliterative. It is easy to kind of throw out there. It is kind of very common out in lots of forums as this is the way to think about analytics. And Joe Sutherland and I, in our book, Analytics the Right Way, A Business Leader's Guide to Putting Data to Productive Use, we don't use that framing. We actually don't think it's that useful for a variety of reasons, but we do have something that maybe at first glance looks a little bit similar, and that's something that we call the ladder of evidence. And the ladder of evidence is right here. And we actually didn't invent ladder of evidence. Our use of what the rungs are on that actually is unique to the book, we believe, as far as we know, because we came up with it. And that is that there are sort of three rungs on this ladder. And they're not bad versus good, but there's anecdotal evidence as the bottom rung. There's descriptive evidence, which is the middle rung, and there's scientific evidence, which is the top rung. And those evidence that is viewed in the context of trying to validate ideas, finding evidence that supports or negates or does not support an idea. And we think of an idea as a hypothesis, and an idea can be framed as a hypothesis. That's also kind of, we spend a fair amount of time in the book talking about the what and why and the how of that. But if we think about anecdotal evidence, it's kind of what you think it might be. It's something where, it's an anecdote. We talked to three customers and they said some things that made some sense. We thought about them and it helped us make a decision. That was anecdotal evidence. We read an article in a journal or we read a scientific study, and that might have been rigorously conducted. It's still anecdotal evidence through our lens. So it's when we have limited data that's not super rigorously, not super broad, not super deep. It is evidence. It can be useful. It can help us make a decision. That's anecdotal evidence. Descriptive evidence is where, in a business context, most organizations spend a lot of time operating because they've invested a ton into gathering and amassing piles of data from their CRM, from their ERP, from their digital analytics platform. And they want to do stuff with that data. They want to plot it. They want to chart it. They want to trend it. They want to put models on it. That is all descriptive evidence. In a way, it's a whole bunch of anecdotes that have been kind of rigorously and methodically gathered together over time and put in a consistent structure. Descriptive evidence is also actually generally pretty weak evidence. It's stronger than anecdotal evidence, but it has a lot of pitfalls in it, and it's very easy to trip and go into those various pitfalls. So it's important to say I'm using descriptive evidence. That is not the strongest evidence out there, and there are a lot of cautionary tales that we need to be aware of and try to avoid. The highest rung is scientific evidence. That is the strongest evidence. That is kind of the gold standard of evidence. Now, and when we say scientific evidence, that for the most part means controlled experimentation, a randomized controlled trial, a clinical trial, an A/B test. It goes under a lot of different names, but that's when we're actually trying to get to true causation. And if we have a high stakes idea and we really want to reduce the uncertainty when we're making a decision, scientific evidence may be what we want to consider. It can be costly. It's not always costly. It really depends. But that's kind of one of the downsides is scientific evidence is new evidence that gets gathered. It's not evidence that it's already sitting in a data warehouse somewhere, which is what descriptive evidence typically is. So these go from weak to strong evidence that is not from bad to good. If I'm faced with a decision that I need to make really quickly and I need to make it really cheaply, then if I have no evidence or anecdotal evidence as my two choices, I'm going to go with anecdotal evidence. If I have an idea that I want to validate, but it's pretty low stakes, and I kind of want to make the decision and move on, anecdotal evidence can be perfectly fine. So it's really about understanding what's the decision-making environment that we're operating in and which type of evidence is most appropriate, and depending on what we're using, avoiding some of the pitfalls based on the nature of that type of evidence. If you're interested in learning more, check out analyticstrw.com. Give the book a look, maybe order it, buy it, let us know what you think.